next guest was nominated for an Oscar last year for his documentary about the late, great James Baldwin. This year, Raoul Peck is tackling the story of another revolutionary in his new film, The Young Karl Marx. Let's take a look.
How do you do? Nice to meet you. Zanella owns foundries. He employs many workers, including children.
Child labor in factories. But we've no choice. Without child labor, we price ourselves out of the market.
And where would a society without exploitation leave people like you? You would have to work too. Wouldn't that be horrible?
S'en révolte contre l'ordre existant, contre le vieux monde. Et j'espère le voir bientôt craquer, ce vieux monde.
There are two kinds of men that have been forged by manual labor, and men who profit from the fruits of that labor.
This has got to stop. It's intolerable. Count yourselves lucky I don't sack the lot of you.
I hate and despise gentlemen. They are swine who grow fat on the sweat of laborers.
We're fit for the scrap heap. Is that what you're saying?
You heard him. Get out. Sie können uns vorübergehend Mundstau, was Sie nicht töten können, ist das Denken.
Ein paar Nächte hinter Gittern wird uns allen ganz gut tun. Meine Herren, wer soweit?
Karl, darf ich vorstellen? Friedrich Engels.
Haben Sie meine Texte gelesen?
Ich habe Ihre gelesen.
Sie sind der größte materialistische Denker unserer Zeit.
Il n'y a pas de bonheur sans révolte.
Tout est soumis au changement. Rien n'est dur.
Nous allons le soulever, ce vieux monde.
Steh du auch auf, gütiger Himmel, wach auf!
Alle Philosophen haben bis jetzt immer nur die ganze Welt interpretiert. Aber man muss sie verändern.
The bourgeois and the workers, are they brothers?
No, they are not. They are enemies.
Qui pense vraiment et pour des esprits libres.
Par ordre du Premier ministre François Guizot, vous êtes expulsé du territoire français.
Je sais reconnaître le sang quand il bout dans la veine. Et le bout dans la veine de tes écrits, mon petit. Karl Marx.
Everybody, please welcome Raoul Peck. Let's hear it. Sir, thank you so much for being here.
Well, pleasure.
Congratulations on the nomination last year. A wonderful thing.
We just got the BAFTA yesterday.
And you just got the BAFTA yesterday. Congratulations on that. Let's talk about the young Karl Marx. I guess the big question for this right off the bat, which I think I know the answer to, is why this story, why right now?
Well, like my previous film on James Baldwin, it was about how do you answer to this world of wide world ignorance? You know, how do you come back to the fundamentals, to the beginning of the story? And that particular story is the beginning of the Industrial Revolution, what we today call capitalism. And we are totally still in it. Even worse, it's all over the planet, including Russia and China. So in order to have complex response to a very complex world, when in a time where head of states are more and more populistic, where the audience and the voters want easy answers, it was important for me to try to deliver to this generation instruments to their own analysis. That's what it is.
What do you elaborate on that? Instruments to their own analysis.
I can draw from my own life. When I was young, there were two heads who helped me structure my mind. Baldwin, which I read when I was 18, and Marx, on which I started working at university in academic surrounding, and I did 4 years on the Capitol. You know, and in terms, I was an economist, so it was the central point of all my studies, and it told me a lot about this particular society, how it functioned, a society that have profit at its center. Any decision in the industry or elsewhere, in the news, elsewhere, is based on profit, which is the worst way to take decision. You know? And with that, you can analyze anything today. You can analyze why a hospital, as soon as they want to be commercial and have profit, the whole health aspect goes down. You know, why a big multinational started to put 10,000 people away, although they are making profit. You know, so they don't want to do only 20% profit, they want to do 25 or worse. So when you know what Marx did is to analyze the way that economy functioned, and he demonstrated how you are bound to go to crisis after crisis. It's the best way to understand what is happening today in a world where it's more and more difficult for young people to understand this machine. You know?
No, I have to ask, and I want to get to the specifics of the young Karl Marx, but I'm curious, as someone who spent so much time with the Capital and thinking about and talking about Marx, how has that affected your aesthetic as a filmmaker, specifically a narrative filmmaker? Because I think it was in the 40s or 50s, a lot of thinkers came out and really criticized popular art of all kinds, both music and film, as these kind of tools of the capitalist system, both with which the way that they elicit feelings, the fact that they're a certain length to sort of be a part of a certain economy. Yeah. How has that affected how you approach your filmmaking?
Well, I was fortunate to come just after what we called at the time the militant cinema. I have elders who have worked on that cinema, and it was a time where the front was so clear between left and right, where the Cold War was very efficient, where the third world countries was trying to find their own future, and they were forced to choose between the right and or the left. You could be only with Moscow or with Washington. Right. So there have been movements who tried to find a third way. And most of them, you know, people like Lumumba, people like Ben Barker, they were assassinated because you were forced to choose. I come from Haiti, and I always had the distance to make my own opinion. And so when I came from this, my elder who were doing the militant cinema, where, you know, even the art part was not really important. It was about the content, you know, the slogan, the dogma, and sound images were not that important. I knew that in order, my aim is not to convince whoever is already convinced. My aim is to go where the audience is, where the voters is, where those who can make the difference are. So a film like this, it was important to make it as open and as appealing possible for young people. Not to indoctrinate them, but to give them some tools. They'll do the job themselves. They'll go and read a few books, like they did with Baldwin. My idea was not to make Baldwin just the sole, you know, head of everything. No, I want you to go and pick up a Baldwin book. And I'm pretty sure when you pick up one, you'll pick up 2, 3, and 4. So that's the same idea with Marx, and go away from the traditional, conventional biopic. Yeah. I knew, because biopic is that's what Hollywood knows best to do. They get you in a story where you're emotionally, totally, you have to adhere to that story. And at the end, the world is wonderful, and the hero have won.
I was listening to someone recently talk about it. They're always stories of growth.
Yeah,
there's a conflict, and that through that conflict the character achieves some kind of growth, and by the end you feel like everything will be fine for them.
Yeah, there's always a response, and you don't have to be involved in it, because you are most of the time involved with your heart, with your emotion. And in this film, I wanted you to be involved, of course, with your heart as well, but with your brain as well. Yeah. You know, to have a certain distance, to see what is going on. The story doesn't evolve because there is a love story between Karl Marx and his wife, Jenny, or a friendship with jealousy with Friedrich Engels. No, the story evolved with the evolution of their ideas, which is difficult to do in cinema. So the challenge for this film was not so much, you know, the costume, the set designing, which was for us important as well and accurate, but it was also how do the story progress in terms of the evolution of ideas of 3 young people from very wealthy family. Engels, his father is a big industrialist. He has factories in Germany and in England. Marx is from a long line of rabbis. pretty middle class. And Jenny is from a very noble family, rich. Her half-brother will become Minister of Interior of Prussia. So she's, very well-known von Westphalen family. So those three young people, they decided to change the world, which is very bold. And they decided also to pay the price for it. So they were not just intellectuals who just say, well, we're going to work with the workers, No, they lived through it. All their life, Marx and Jenny didn't have much money. In fact, Engels is the one providing them with money. Marx was a writer, he was a journalist. By the way, he works for several years for the New York, what's the name of the paper? New York Post, I forgot the name. It's an American newspaper. And he would write analysis about what was going on in the US and in Europe. He was, of course, he didn't get much money for that, but he lived on that for a long time. So Engels was the one supporting the family.
Is there a part of you in making this film that is trying to find some sort of middle ground between radical and approachable?
Middle ground, I'm not sure is the right word. It's, I always take myself as an example. How did I approach when I was young that story? And what is realistic? What is real? Like I didn't want to play any games. I tried to be, and my co-writer Pascal Bonitzer, we tried to be very accurate about this story. By example, we didn't go for any biographer of Marx. We didn't go through any expert of Marx. We went straight to their correspondence, to letters they have written to each other.
And you also didn't, as I think you just said before, you didn't say, oh, he has a wife, so therefore he has a conflict with his wife about their marriage, or about someone's having an affair or something like that, or he and Engels have some sort of jealousy over it. You didn't really you didn't go after those to create kind of like false drama between characters.
Exactly. So that's what makes the screenplay much more difficult to write, because it's not, once you decide that you're going to stick to history, you're going to stick to the facts. So you cannot just invent a dramatic moment just because it will be great in a film when it didn't happen. So that's why we had to find the right moments in their real life to transcribe it in a way that it works in the film. And the fuel of the film were the discussion, it's rare to make a film where it's about the evolution of an idea and not the evolution of an action. There are few action, but they are credible, they are plausible and real. But other than that, everything is how those three people who decide to not only change the world, but also to organize it a way where they can fight.
When you came out with the James Baldwin film, I think it came out 2 years ago at this point, right?
Last year.
Last year? Okay, I thought it fairly early into last year. Were you surprised at how? I mean, I know James Baldwin. I love James Baldwin's work, but a documentary about James Baldwin that, it gripped the country. I knew lots of people who had never heard of him who were watching the film. Did that surprise you?
Well, I must say, during the whole time I was working and my team on this film, it took us as well 10 years, like this one. We did both films together at the same time.
You've been working on both of these films at the same time?
Yeah, and while making other films as well. But those two projects were important. And I knew I couldn't make them, I had to make them the way I really want to make. So, and to have, the power on it, not to have to make any compromise. That's why you get that kind of films. So my aim was to make sure that those films will exist. And no matter if there is success or not, but I knew that the way we made them, they would exist for the next 20, 30 years. So whoever can use them, fine, but I was not after any major success. It was about, the work I do sometimes, I feel like it's how do I save as much as possible in this crazy world that we have right now.
Is the world feel crazy to you right now?
Absolutely. Crazy and ignorant, that's the worst part. And so how do I save some sort of part of our history, whether you're black or white, what interests me is the history of humanity. What are the big changes? How do we change the world? What is happening now is it's just a little part of it. The world is being transformed right now. And if we look back, the last 40 years, we have to look forwards the next 30, 40 years. That's the world we're going to be in.
Do you think, this is a big question, but since we're talking about Karl Marx and the beginning of the Industrial Revolution, a lot of people are saying what we're seeing right now and why there are such dramatic shifts happening in the world right now is because we are on the cusp or the beginning of a new kind of industrial revolution. Do you feel that way as well?
No, I think it's the same capitalistic society.
Oh, yeah.
But like Marx said, the power of the capitalist system is that it can renew itself again and again. After each crisis, it comes out with new ways to continue to prosper. The last crisis, the subprime crisis, 6-8 months after that, after the state bailed out all those banks, they were in business again, finding new ways to speculate. So
hiring as many lawyers as possible to find the loophole, yeah.
As well, yes. And so the difficulty is that on the other side, people who want to change that way of living and making business, meaning with profit at the center, it's much more difficult because capitalism is in our head, all of us, tiny parts. So it's harder to change that in ourselves. We see it, how we have become wonderful consumers. And if I take back your iPhone or your Wi-Fi at home, you're going to go on the street and demonstrate. So it's harder because it asks not only sacrifice sometimes or to renounce to stuff that you are so at ease with it, because we are also became individualistic. So it's very much harder to build a collective because it's about a collective response. It's not about looking for a leader or looking for somebody who will change everything. No, it's about us, all of us, or at least a majority, to be able to have the same diagnostic or similar diagnostic and decide after we sat down together that this is the way we want to go. So this is heavy, this is hard. It asks of, those guys, they were sitting in public libraries, studying, reading everything they could put their hands on, doing statistic, watching budget, seeing how, the riches that were produced, in what hand they concentrate. This is analysis. So it's hard. That's why they wrote the Communist Manifest, which is in fact a book for the workers at the time, so that they could understand their society, how they function. They were against putting people on the street with a few slogans and say down with the king or down with the president. They wanted, in particular Marx, there is a scene in the film where he said, ignorance never helped anybody, because it's about knowledge. It's about knowing what's going on. It's about knowing what's your place in that context, So it's much harder. And in a time of, you see how much time we have to have such a discussion, it's really limited. Where another guy can come and say, oh, let's make America great again. He doesn't have to prove anything. He doesn't even have to explain what he just say. What does it mean, great again? When was it great? I come from Haiti. America have sustained that dictatorship for 30 years, the Duvalier dictatorship. So was it that time great? Or was it the slavery time? Or was it when the Native Americans were killed? Was it the Vietnam War? So define great again. So in order to have a discussion about that, you never have the time. He doesn't have to explain anything. He can just sit or tweet and say, climate change is a hoax, period. He doesn't have to explain anything. So that's why it's always hard to resist, to explain. So that's why I believe in education. I believe that each one of us, we need to know our history. We need to know where we come from. We need to know how do we land right now to that present situation.
What's so interesting about the phrase ignorance never helped anybody, especially given our current climate, is it feels as though nobody feels like they are ignorant right now because they have so much access to vast amounts of information and they feel like information is getting pumped into them consistently, yet they are, without casting judgment on a great many of people, fairly ignorant about the majority of what's happening in the world and happening to them. I'm wondering when it goes back to, I'm going to tie this into a question, don't you worry. When we're talking about Karl Marx and we're talking about James Baldwin, one of the most fascinating things about the Baldwin documentary is he is on mainstream talk shows coming from a very left-wing perspective and criticizing the system itself from a very left-wing perspective. And I think about Karl Marx, and his writings were being read by a great many people at that time. He wasn't just some sort of fringe weirdo being cast off to the side. When we look at talk shows now, all we see in terms of fringe people, it's fairly fringe right-wingers that are on mainstream TV and that are celebrated. So where is a place for left-wing thinkers such as yourself, like Raoul Peck or others, to be able to present their ideas, their critiques of the system as a whole? I don't know.
That's one of the big victory of the system. I used to say, well, we lost the rhetorical battle. We lost the ownership of words and their meanings, and that's a terrible loss because it's hard for us to argument publicly. There are so many people, somebody like Howard Zinn, who died a few years back, an incredible, important historian. You hardly saw him on TV. But
Chomsky?
Or Chomsky, because there is no room for them. People want short phrases and slogans, etc. So it's a hard battle. But if you go back and see it from far away, it's a short time in the history of humankind. It's what I see is that, unfortunately, we are going to go very far in that ignorance before we can come back. And there will be more populists like Donald Trump. And there will be more of us voting for him because we still hope for the simple answer, for the thing that you can do just like this, and we will always find the new culprit. Now they are the immigrants, This country has been built by immigrants, and I'm not even talking about the genocide of the Native American. So if you don't know that history...
Or those that we forced to immigrate here and then put in chains.
The Europeans who came here, they were dying of hunger or they were fleeing wars. That's how they end up here. So having that kind of discourse today is either to say to everybody, forget the past, nothing have happened, and we are building anew as if it's a clean slate. There is not such a thing of a clean slate. You're always carrying your history, and it will come out at some point. And unfortunately, sometimes it comes out violently, and that's not in our interest. But that's the history of the world. So as a filmmaker, my way to deal with it, because I can't compete in the daily tweet and Facebook and Instagram, is to at least try to make films that I hope will survive.
Put forth some kind of lasting work.
Yeah, put it out there, and people who are looking and searching will find it at some point.
Something that's not disposable.
Exactly.
Harder question for you. Do you ever worry that when you spend 10 years making something like this, that when you finally put it out, that it will still be treated as though it is something disposable by those who don't know how to commend a piece of work that took years to make? Or not that it'll just be seen as disposable, but it'll only be viewed by the audience who is already fairly in agreement with you?
Well, I never think like this because otherwise I would never make...
You shouldn't, because then you wouldn't make wonderful work.
Of course, and first of all, I don't know that it's going to take 10 years, by the way. You just start it and say, okay, I have to go all the way. Yeah. But whether it's 5 years or 10 years or 20, I don't know. So that's the first thing. And the second thing is, well, I have no choice, Once you are in this media, and it's about money in the film industry. And I decided to come to film through politics. For me, film was an incredible way to deal with people, with history, with politics. And that's where the people are. Today, most of our information are through images and sound and visuals. So if you want to fight, that's where you have to be. And you have to go where everybody is, not where you have your niche and your convinced group of people. You know, they know where to find their information. They know what books to read, etc. Where you need to be is where younger people are watching every day, and you hope that somebody will pick it up. But you can't be thinking about, you know, the condition to do it is that I'm sure that it's going to be picked up or it's going to be shown. No, you have no guarantee to that. In fact, making them is already a miracle, you know. So, and making a film is a miracle. You know, people think, yeah, you can make film like this. Yeah, if you're making products, this is easier.
Even when you are making product in a film, even people who make the worst product possible in movies still feel like it's a miracle they got a chance to do it.
Exactly, and so many things can go wrong as well. So I see it, the only way I personally I deal with it is to make sure that whatever I do, whatever energy I put in something, that something will stay. You know, it's not just popcorn. It's not just, you know, something you can watch once and then throw away. You know, I make sure that generation can see it. So it's important also not to date the movie, meaning at every level, whether it's the writing, you know, make sure that what you write is not interesting in the moment where it'll come out. You know, people ask me, you know, sometimes, did you know that the Baldwin film would come out right now after Trump? No, I didn't know that. And if I had thought like this, the film would have been far worse. I mean, it would have been bad, because it would be very opportunistic. And
Baldwin's never going to not be relevant, though.
Exactly, but you still have to make it in a way that you don't go easy on you. You know, when, like in the film, you have a sentence of Baldwin saying that, well, all those young people being killed by the police, you know, and they were too young to have done anything. He wrote that 40 years ago. No way I could imagine it was after a few years of young people being killed by the police. So I could do that sequence in a very opportunistic way, you know, just take the words and the images. No, I had to find an artistic way to do that sequence, so that it's powerful forever, but not just for now, for this last year and this year, where it's all over the news. So those are always decisions that you have to do all the way through the process, from the writing, through the filming, the editing, until the end. Not to date the whatever you're producing, you know.
And now when it comes to the Young Karl Marx, I think, and it may just be because it's a critique of the same system, the system is just more vast now that we live in it, but at moments, it does feel like you intentionally inserted what could feel like allegories or references to the system as it is now. Maybe that's just naturally because the work still holds up. But then, I mean, at least in the credits, you very much go there.
Yeah. Well, there are two things. The work holds up. I mean, if you stay on the Marx who analyze the capitalist society, it's totally accurate right now. Yeah. You know, it's, again, if you read the first chapter of the Communist Manifest, by the way, the book that have been most read in the whole world, even with the Bible. So if you read that first chapter,
is it true, really?
Yeah. Yeah. Wow. Well, if you count China, if you count
oh yeah, Russia, fair enough. Yeah.
You know, so and but it's really it started since you know the 1850. It came out 1848, and then was not really well known. But the generation after that, it was like the Bible somehow. So if you read that first chapter, it's exactly the description of what have happened those last years, when he talk about the tendency of capital to go beyond frontiers, to go more and more toward the whole planet, and the horizon of speculation, and the machine that you can't control anymore because there is no driver sitting. That's the thing. Marx described that exactly. So it's accurate, it's today. And the other aspect that was important, of course, at the end of the film, I used Bob Dylan and those archives. It's also to make sure that we make the connections. Because that's something that happened also, that we have all memories that have been cut up in little pieces. And we don't know anymore how to link them. We don't know how to link our own personal history. So, and that's a way to keep you down as well. The less you know, the better you are for the system. But if you start to make connection, I made a film on Lumumba, who was the first prime minister of Congo, 1961, assassinated, partly with the CIA help. And we know that until today, more than 60 years, Congo was never at peace. And at the same time, we know that today, the content in our cell phones come from Congo. That's a link. You know, and you could do that with all the wars, the Vietnam War, the Korea War, Afghanistan, that America paid to arm bin Laden, etc. Saddam Hussein was the best friend of the French. They helped him get his first uranium plant, etc., etc. When Trump say, make America great again, when whole generation, the only idea of America they had, including in my own country, they were the guys giving money to the dictators. You know, 30 years in Haiti, Chile, coup d'etat, you know, against Allende, a democratically elected president. Yes, on the left. So what? Democracy? It's either democracy or there is no democracy. Mm-hmm. So when you know all those pieces, Mandela, celebrated by everybody. Mandela was member of the Communist Party of South Africa, you know, and he was in prison that long, and he came out with a dialogue of peace, you know. Those are those figures that are important. You know, you need to know your history. Otherwise, you can't really judge what they are feeding you with, you know, and that's the capacity that we lost with the abundance of information.
Now we see that that abundance of information sort of tricking the idea of making connections, and we have fake connections that are being created, and people don't know where they're going. They just want to make connections because they know that they're there, and you try to tell them the connections that are real like that, and they've got their own sort of like far-fetched, I hate to sort of categorize it, but like right-wing connections that are being made that are just sort of being put out there to muddy the waters. So these connections can't be made.
To come back to Marx, that's one of the things that Marx analyzed. He said, like, if you don't dominate the technology, it will dominate you. You know, that's basic Marx. And Marx was almost a cheerleader of the capacity of capitalism to produce knowledge, to produce technology, to produce new ways of production. What he criticized is the exploitation that goes with it, is the blindness that goes with it, that because you want to make profit, you don't care about the people working on your factories. But in terms of the capacity of putting stuff together, of creating new values, he celebrated that capacity. But you need to control it, you know, and not being a victim of it. And unfortunately, what's happening on the internet, we became victim of it. Oh, yeah. You know, I remember, I'm old enough for you know, the young people here. My first access to internet was through my university, because only universities had access to the internet. And I remember the day that AOL came out, and I was obliged to pay for it. I said, we lost. I knew we lost, because now it became something for profit. AOL, I'm sorry. But that's the reality. I knew that once it becomes for profit, it's difficult to resist, because like in the character in the film, he said, well, you're using children in your factories. And the guy said, yeah, but if I don't, all the others competitor will be better than me at the market. So that's the thing. Marx did not condemn the capitalist as an individual, but he criticized the system itself that forces you with perfectly good excuse to do whatever damage you're doing. You know, you say, oh, it's not me, it's the market. Yeah. But the market don't exist. The market crash every 5-10 years. And who bailed the market out? The state. Each time. You know, that simple...
Because the state bails out the market, the state doesn't have any money for communities or...
No, but the state is us. We pay taxes. So the same capitalist who said, I want freedom. I want to be able to sell my product anywhere. I don't want regulation. I want to produce whatever I want. I don't want any restriction. I want to drill everywhere I want. And when there is a catastrophe, the first institution you call is the state. Please, can you help me? Because I'm bankrupt.
It's what I think Chomsky called it socialism for the wealthy.
Yeah, well, yeah.
Yeah, right.
There is the other phrase, you know, you privatize the profit and you socialize the
loss.
The loss.
Yeah.
You know.
Let's get some questions. Who's got a question? Right here.
Hi. So you mentioned that Russia and China are becoming more capitalistic too. Do you think that is because of internet and e-commerce growing, or do you see the internet kind of changing capitalism in the future?
No, the internet is the instrument, one of the many instruments. The acceleration of information, the acceleration of market development. But I think there is an historical development and an economical development that those countries could not be outside the system anymore. You know, there have been tremendous political crises in Russia. There was coup d'etat. There was, you know, we were that far from a world war, a third world war. You know, and that's something we don't say enough about Gorbachev. You know, if Gorbachev was a crazy guy like either Stalin or even Putin today, he would have go for the confrontation. Gorbachev was intelligent for everybody. He said, no, let's decrease the tension. And then it was, you know, the country had to open, and this whole bureaucracy that they built just came crumbling down because the system could not survive. So that's the strength of capitalism also. It invaded totally Russia. Now, in Russia, you have the biggest capitalists ever. Those are oligarchy. You know, there's a few people who have, you know, billions and billions, who control everything. So in China, you have also the same development, basically. You still have a very strong, I would say, bureaucratic, centralized system. At the same time, the economy is totally capitalistic. You see the same inequalities about the wealth in very few hands. You have the amount of billionaires in China is absolutely phenomenal.
But isn't it like over 700 million Chinese live in absolute poverty, no electricity, no
Oh yeah, there is
running
poverty.
water?
There have been 10, 20 years ago, there were famine in certain corner of the country. Yeah, so you see that capitalists have invaded. That's what Marx have written, the whole planet, because he didn't talk specifically about China or any other country, but he say that's the fundamental tendency of capital. There is no limit, there is no nation, there is no geography. It tends to invade everywhere. That's the strength of that system. But what it says also that we can stop it if we get together. If that's something he inherited from Hegel. Don't forget, Hegel was the greatest philosopher ever. And he started working on the fact that at the time when we had kings, the kings came from God. So he was the representative of God on earth. So whatever he decided was the law. And then Hegel started questioning that. It said, no, it's not the king, it's not God. it's human being who makes history. And Marx took that idea from Hegel and transformed it. So if it's mankind who does history, so mankind can change history. And that's the very important knowledge that Marx brings. So, and to change that, you have to educate yourself. You have to understand the world you're living in and find the right way to change it. And you have to change it in a collective way and in a democratic way. You don't have to kill your neighbor to change it. Marx never said that you should kill anybody. By the way, Marx and Engels and Jenny, they would have been the first to be killed by Stalin. That's for sure. And by the way, the Russian Revolution also killed a lot of important leadership, including somebody like Trotsky, who had to go into exile, although Trotsky also killed a few people. But then when he realized that was not the right way, he left, and they killed him in Mexico. So that type of revolution, at the end, the people who stay are the reckless people, the people who didn't care about killing their own companions. So you need to know that history in order to really make up your mind and understand, in what game you are. Otherwise, you lost because the machine is so strong, and you are so lazy. I see it by myself. How to find certain books or to cut out CNN because they are telling me the same thing again and again and again. You need some sort of resistance, because it's so easy to just stay on the internet and say bench watch television series, etc. So where is the space left for your own thoughts? That's a reality. I mean, I see it in myself, in my own work. And young people, it's even worse for them. At least when I was in university, I had people to guide me. I had teachers or friends who gave me a book. My first Baldwin book was given to me by two black American friends who were a gay couple in Berlin. They say, you should read this. This type of thing happened less and less because you don't even have the space for it. You don't have the space in your brain and in your daily life. If you're tweeting and talking with me, you don't have the same attention span. So all those things have consequences. That's the other thing. Nothing is left without consequence. So when we're trying to find a way, we have to deconstruct all this. How do I get there? How come my life is like this? I wake up in the morning, I'm on Facebook already. And before I go to bed, I have to send a few tweets. Is this my life? How was it 30 years ago? Is it the best way to deal? When do I sit down and read a book of Baldwin? Because when I read Baldwin, it just blew up my mind. It's just a whole world open for me.
Can I pose a devil's advocate argument? As we say that the instrument is just a tool, and Twitter and Facebook are just tools, you sit down and you read a Baldwin book and it blew your mind. I think there are, without sounding pessimistic, I think there are many people who would sit down and read a Baldwin book and it wouldn't blow their mind. They wouldn't get it. They would be passive about it. It may not elicit a reaction. And I wonder sometimes if we...
Any other writer, I would say yes. Baldwin, no.
I love Baldwin. But I wonder sometimes if we have this imagined ideal of a world where people are engaged and read and knowledgeable, but I wonder if the fundamental nature of humans is of that, and if that there are actually, it's a much more of a rarity.
Well, I will answer you as
I don't
Marx
think that one is better than the other in any way,
Well, the thing is, as Marx would say, you are determined by your economical being. What is, in what class are you born in? That has an influence to your way of studying, of reading. If you come from a poor family, you're already born with a set of dysfunctionment. Your neighborhood, the school you're going to go to, it's not the best school, they are not the best teachers. you know, the health, the hospital you go to, etc., etc. When you're born in a rich family, you're bound to go to a good school, to have the best teacher who gives you the best books, etc., etc.
I know plenty of rich people who have gotten that and still suck.
Yeah, well, that's those are of course. No, that doesn't. No, but that's the thing. If you are in a rich class, your tendency is to keep up that condition. Yes. Your tendency is not to say, "Oh my God, this world sucks. I'm going to do whatever I can to break it." No.
Nobody wants to confront themselves as the possible oppressor either.
No, and also even when you do that, there are many ways to do that. You can have a discourse to criticize, you know, the place of profit in our life. You can criticize the way the media works, etc. But you can still do it in your own comfort. You don't have to pay for it. And whereas people like Marx, Engels, those were again from rich family. But they left their class, social class. They made the ultimate sacrifice. They live in poverty. I don't say that everybody should live in poverty because of that, but they test the situation. They never made their decision for their life or their work depending on how much money they would earn. That's the first rule that enables you to survive in a decent way and stay close to what you really think. You know, that's what saved me. I never had to make a film because of money. You know, and I remember my first film, the first 10 years as a filmmaker. It was not easy, but it was important that I don't get myself in a situation where I'm obliged to make a film a certain way because of the people who are giving me the money. You know, that's almost hygienic rules. You know, you have to know how the system functions in order to not survive, but to go on to do what you decided to do. And the system have many ways to compromise you. You know, they can. I was a teacher at NYU. I saw how some of my students, it was impossible for them to resist. Yeah. You know, I know, and some of them I know are famous, and I know the kind of film they wanted to make. Right. One, a few years ago, he said, "Professor Peck, you know what kind of film I wanted to make, but now I have success with those films. And that's what they are offering me all the time. And I have bills to pay. And I can't go back."
Loans to pay, right? Probably had loans to pay.
Yes, etc. In fact, most of your lives are in credit. You know, it's much harder to go in the streets and protest if you own your fridge, your car, your mortgage. You know, the risk is far higher. So there are reasons how the system keeps you, you know, where you are. So the amount of energy, of collective discussion, etc., the amount of time to learn is hard to come up with, you know.
I think we have time for one more question. Right here.
Hi. I just want to say that I'm very intrigued with how you handled the subjects of both Baldwin and Karl Marx, but in two different ways. Like, you could have done another documentary for Karl Marx, but you chose to have it as a narrative. As a film student myself at NYU, we're starting to learn more now how to incorporate activism into our projects and make it more than just for profit. And so what I really wanted to understand from you was, how do you approach with subjects and topics like these, step by step? Like, what is the initial basis that you ground your films in before you work up to production and everything like that?
Well, it's a wider question, because it's about how you educate yourself in a more, I would say, general way. You know, I feel like if you're an artist, a writer, a filmmaker, a painter, you need to understand the society you live in. You need to understand how it functions. And there are great writers, there are great philosophers, there are great critics like Marx who give you don't have to accept it, but at least they give you food for thought, and you can try to understand. You need to know. You know, you need, what I tell my students, you need to do your homework. You know, it's not today, everybody feel, how do you say, encouraged to write whatever you want on a tweet without having to prove it. But if you are an artist, you have a responsibility. You have to know your subject. And you have to know it in a way which is not superficial. You know, all my films are always precedent by a lot of research. I try to read everything. I try to read, you know, all the different corners, and because that is what ultimately gives you your freedom. You know, when you know what the field is, you are much more at ease to find your own voice and to say, this is the way I want to tell that story. And you're not afraid to, you know, hurt anybody specifically, or you have response to whoever come to you and say, well, your film was this and this. You know, like some people say, well, Marx has a conventional way of biopic. I say, no, you don't know your homework. A biopic is ruled a totally different way. And I exactly didn't want, so my challenge was not to use some sort of, you know, Shakespeare in Love type of approach for Marx. No, the challenge was to make you watch a film about the evolution of idea, which is what cinema had lots of difficulty to do. You know, so that's what my challenge was, not to make some extraordinary sound effect or a camera movement. No, on the contrary, I didn't want to lose you, because the film asks of you to be a little bit focused, because it's about evolution of ideas. You need to hear the words, you know, to understand what the film is about. So it's, again, there is no rules. You know, I think that if you do your homework, you will feel at ease with whatever you're saying or whatever you're working on. You know, you need to see what your elders have done. You know, you're not just, you didn't came in the world naked and then you have to invent everything. No. See what the others have made, their success and their failure. And then you'll find your own way. But you are always on the shoulder of people before you. And you need to recognize that too. Otherwise, you're going to think, oh, I'm inventing everything. And you can see it on Facebook. A lot of people think they are inventing everything. And when you are old enough like me, you say, no. 15 years ago, there's this guy, he did that, and it was 10 times better than what you're doing. So it's part of the reality, and it asks a lot of you because you have less space to find yourself because you are bombarded with so much stuff. And it's like when there is a lot of noise, when you're humming something, you can hardly hear yourself. That's the way I feel it is a lot of times now.
I have to let you go, but I'm going to ask you one more, I think, cheeky question before I let you go. Cheeky's a weird word. What does it feel like to have the conversation that we just had about Karl Marx on a stage owned by Verizon?
Well, listen, some of my best friends are at Verizon. Well, that's in, no, but serious, yes, because that's one of the false attack as when you are in the left that you have had 20, 30 years ago. Is like, oh, how come you are a leftist and you are driving a car? You know, that's you know, low-level attack because, yeah, well, you are living in that society. You know, I'm not saying that I should live in a tent with no water and no electricity. You know, that's not my view of life. But when I have electricity, TV, and I am allowed also to criticize the way I am serving this. I can criticize you because you leave me no choice than to pay that bill that I don't want to pay, that I could have it for cheaper, etc., etc. I don't need to watch your commercial all the time when I'm watching a film and you are stopping it every 5 minutes to sell me some you know, product that I probably won't need.
And you're putting the product in the film. And
exactly. So it's a false process to say, you know, that's an easy critic to say, well, how do you deal with it? No, and by the way, I feel like I own this too, because I pay taxes. Haiti pay a very high price to the prosperity of this country. Black people paid a very high price to the prosperity of this country. So it's mine also. Yeah. So you have no way to tell me what I should do or not do. So it's a false debate. And lastly, in the film industry, and that's why I was able to make all those films, you can find allies, people who will support you, people who understand what you're trying to do. Even I made a film with HBO on the most difficult subject ever, on the genocide in Rwanda. That was Idris Elba's first film. But I had total freedom. And that was the price I asked. I said, you want me, it was your idea. They had bought the rights of a book. And they asked me if I would make a film, a sort of African Schindler List. I said, no, I can't. And the discussion.
You can get into what that entails.
Yeah, well, exactly, and make a film about the African continent with all the prejudice that
with
exists
a happy
already,
ending.
And possibly with the IP. In fact, they were asking me to make more or less Hotel Rwanda, and I said no. I can't do that. I live in Africa. I live in Congo. I know the situation. I can't afford to do that. I want to go home and be able to face my people. So, but we continue the discussion. So the head of HBO at the time, we had all sort of discussion. And I told him, if I do a film like this, I want to be able to go there and spend some time. I don't want any American and even white American as the central character. I want the Rwandese to be the characters of this movie. And I want to shoot in Rwanda. And they say yes to all of this. Mm-hmm. So maybe another individual would have said no. But again, HBO can say yes to this because they are not bound to a viewership, a daily score. They have
weekend box office.
Exactly. Yeah. So nothing is by chance like this. There are reasons.
I guess the context for my joke about the stage in Verizon was more the idea, the criticism that many have that no matter how far the critique or the subversive goes, the system is so big that it'll eventually consume it and present it in a way that makes people feel as though they are free, but they are still participating within the system.
Yeah, that's true. But at the same time,
what are you going to do?
There's a system in 2008 which almost went down the drain. The system was bankrupt. If it was not for Obama, bailing out everybody, it would have been a planetary breakdown. That same system who have indeed a lot of power, but that same system is also fragile. Our job is to find those fragility. Our job is to find ways to not only survive, but to create new world with whatever means necessary, like all the elders said.
Sir, when can people see the Young Karl Marx? How can they see the film?
Starting this week, Friday, first in New York and LA, and then further, depending how it goes, to other cities in this country.
It's a wonderful film. You're one of our great filmmakers. Everybody, please give a round of applause for Raoul Peck.